Welcome back, everybody. Today, let's just jump right into it.
Yeah.
We're going back in time to when Europe was kind of like a powder keg, just ready to explode.
Yeah.
So imagine a world where the Pope was like the ultimate authority figure, right? And if you challenged him, it could literally cost you your life. That's the world that Martin Luther stepped into back in 1521. And thankfully, you sent us a fascinating collection of sources.
Yeah.
First-hand accounts, historical analyses, the whole shebang, all focused on Luther's journey to the city of Worms to face the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, the big moment. So in this deep dive, we're going to unpack all the political drama,
Oh, yeah.
the theological clashes, and really just the sheer audacity of Luther's actions.
It's really something.
It's an incredible story. And for anyone out there who's ever felt like they're standing alone, facing down a Goliath Luther story, it's really both inspiring and it'll give you pause.
Yeah, what's crucial to understand here is that this wasn't just some academic debate about, religious dogma. This was a showdown between individual conscience and the combined power of the church and the emperor. Like, the future of Europe hung in the balance.
That's heavy stuff.
It is.
And our sources really bring that tension to life. I mean, we have excerpts from a letter written by a papal legate.
Oh, wow.
Who was basically just gossiping about Luther's arrival in Worms.
I love that.
I know. And he describes Luther entering the city like a conquering hero with this huge entourage, and people were even touching his cloak.
Like a rock star.
Yeah, as if they were like holy relics or something.
That's a powerful image, and it speaks volumes about Luther's popularity at the time.
Honestly.
He was already a celebrity, in part thanks to the printing press, which allowed his ideas to spread like wildfire. I mean, it's fascinating to consider how new technologies can disrupt the status quo and amplify individual voices.
Absolutely. It's a theme that resonates throughout history, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then there's the Diet of Worms itself. Now, for anyone who might not be familiar with the term, a diet was like a formal assembly of the Holy Roman Empire. And this particular diet was convened by Emperor Charles V.
Right.
And it was a really huge deal.
Yeah, you have to remember Charles V, he was only 20 years old at the time.
Wow, 20 years old.
But he was already ruling this vast empire, right? Dealing with threats from the Ottomans in the East, and he needed to maintain unity within his realm.
Right.
So Luther's challenge to the church, that was a major thorn in his side.
Major problem. So Luther gets summoned to this grand assembly. What was Charles V hoping to achieve? Was it just a theological debate, or was there something more at play?
Oh, so much more than just some friendly theological discussion. I mean, Luther had already been declared a heretic by the Pope, and Charles V was under immense pressure to deal with him. But there's another layer to this. Luther was also under the protection of Frederick the Wise, the Elector of Saxony.
Okay, let's unpack that term elector for a second.
Sure.
So essentially, these were powerful German princes who had the right to elect the Holy Roman Emperor. And Frederick was one of the most powerful, and he was actually instrumental in helping Charles V secure the throne.
Exactly. So Charles V, he couldn't simply ignore Frederick or silence Luther without risking some serious political repercussions.
It was a delicate balancing act.
It really was. And remember, religious beliefs were deeply intertwined with political ambitions and power plays.
Why?
So understanding this context is absolutely crucial to grasping the events that unfolded.
And to make matters even more complicated, some of our sources mention bribes, marriage alliances, and the constant threat of war with the Ottomans.
Yeah.
It sounds like a political thriller.
It absolutely was.
So Luther receives this summons, knowing full well that it could basically be a death sentence.
Yeah.
He even said, "We are all Hussites," on his way to Worms.
Wow.
Referencing Jan Hus, who was a reformer who'd been burned at the stake a century earlier, despite being promised safe passage.
It's chilling.
It's a scary thought.
Yeah.
It must take an incredible courage to walk into that situation.
There's a real sense of defiance in Luther's actions.
For sure.
A willingness to face the consequences of his beliefs. And his journey to Worms itself was almost like a political campaign.
Really?
Our sources describe crowds flocking to see him, sermons delivered along the way, the palpable excitement in the air.
It's clear he already had a massive following.
Oh, yeah.
And this brings us to that dramatic confrontation in the emperor's chamber.
Oh, yeah?
Imagine Luther standing there in his simple monk's robes, surrounded by all the opulence and power of the imperial court. I mean, you can practically feel the tension in the air.
It's a scene ripe with symbolism. The humble monk versus the most powerful man in Europe. And just when everyone is expecting him to launch into this big defense of his writings, right?
Yeah.
Luther does something unexpected.
What's that?
He asks for more time.
More time? That seems like an odd move. What was he thinking?
It was actually a brilliant tactical maneuver.
Oh, really?
By requesting time to consider recanting, Luther delayed the confrontation, he created suspense,
Right.
and bought himself precious hours to gather his thoughts. This wasn't just about theology.
Right.
Luther was playing the game of power, and he played it well.
The next day, the stage was set for the final showdown.
Yeah.
The crowds were even bigger.
Wow.
So they moved the proceedings to a larger hall. It must have felt like a theatrical performance.
Oh, absolutely. And Luther, he knew how to work a crowd.
For sure.
And he used that to his advantage. So when they pressed him to defend his writings, he argued that the excitement they had generated was proof of their truth, essentially claiming public opinion as evidence of blind support.
Wow.
It's a powerful rhetorical strategy that still resonates even today.
Absolutely. And then, when the moment of truth arrived, Luther dropped the hammer.
Okay.
My conscience, he declared, is captive to the word of God. I cannot and will not recant anything.
Talk about a mic drop moment.
Yeah, it's iconic.
This statement really gets to the very heart of Luther's challenge to the established order.
Yeah.
He elevated individual conscience above the authority of the church and the emperor. It was a revolutionary concept.
And then there's the line that I think everyone remembers.
Yeah.
Here I stand.
Yeah.
I can do no other. God help me. Amen.
Right.
It's become synonymous with taking a stand for your beliefs, even when the odds are stacked against you.
Whether he actually uttered those exact words is debatable, but the sentiment is undeniable.
Oh, yeah. Luther was framing himself as a lone warrior for truth, fighting against the forces of darkness. And his enemies, by giving him this platform, had inadvertently amplified his message. They probably regretted giving him that stage. The trial they had intended turned into a PR triumph for Luther.
You're absolutely right. They totally underestimated Luther's charisma and his ability to connect with ordinary people.
But even after this dramatic declaration, the story doesn't end there.
It doesn't.
Nope. True to his word, the emperor does grant Luther safe passage.
Okay.
But he also declares him an outlaw.
What?
And orders his books to be burned.
Imagine Luther heading back to Wittenberg, knowing he's a wanted man. This is where our deep dive takes a dramatic turn.
Okay, I'm hooked.
Yeah.
What happens next?
He's kidnapped.
Kidnapped. Now, hold on a minute. Who would do that and why?
Well, that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive.
Oh, come on.
We'll uncover the mystery of Luther's disappearance and explore how the Reformation continued to unfold in his absence. You won't want to miss it.
All right. I guess we'll have to wait. But I can't wait to hear what happened next.
Me neither.
So until next time, keep exploring. And we'll see you back here for part 2 of our deep dive into Martin Luther's world.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Martin Luther's world. Last time, we left off with Luther declared an outlaw, his books ordered to be burned, but granted safe passage, and then, bam, kidnapped.
It's like something out of a medieval thriller.
Totally. It certainly had all the elements of a cloak and dagger operation. But this was no random act of violence, right?
Right. It was a carefully orchestrated rescue mission.
Okay, I have to know. Who were these mysterious kidnappers? And who was the mastermind behind this elaborate scheme?
Well, the mastermind was none other than Luther's protector.
Oh, wow.
Frederick the Wise. Remember, he was the Elector of Saxony, one of the most powerful figures in the Holy Roman Empire. Frederick had a vested interest in keeping Luther safe,
I bet.
both for personal and political reasons.
So he stages this elaborate kidnapping to protect Luther from, I guess, from those who would see him silenced. What a twist. But where did they take him? Some remote monastery hidden in the mountains or something?
Not quite a monastery, but certainly a place of refuge. They spirited Luther away to Wartburg Castle, perched high above the town of Eisenach. And actually, it wasn't entirely unfamiliar territory. Luther had spent some time there as a student.
Oh, really?
And to keep his identity secret, they gave him a new persona.
Okay, I like this.
Junker Jorg, a knight complete with a beard and, believe it or not, a codpiece.
Wait, a codpiece. That's hilarious. I can't imagine the fiery reformer Martin Luther trying to pull off the dashing knight.
Apparently, he wasn't very convincing.
That's what I figured.
Our sources describe him as, like, a terrible horseman prone to complaining about the food,
Oh, no.
and even having a meltdown over a hunted hare.
Seriously?
Yeah, it seems like the quiet life of a country gentleman didn't quite suit his temperament.
That doesn't surprise me. This is a man who thrives on debate and confrontation.
Right.
But surely he wasn't just sitting around complaining about the lack of good wine. Right.
You're right, Luther wasn't one to sit idle. Despite the relative comfort of the castle, he struggled with boredom, isolation, and this nagging sense of guilt that he wasn't actively fighting for the Reformation.
I can see that.
Our sources really paint a vivid picture of his internal struggles.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
He complained of insomnia, constipation, even claimed to have nightly battles with the devil himself.
Really? The devil?
It's true.
Wow. These accounts provide a fascinating glimpse into Luther's psychological state. Makes you wonder, is this a man who thrives in isolation?
That's a good question.
Or is the Reformation demanding his return?
He was clearly a man of intense emotions and deep spiritual convictions.
For sure.
But even amidst all this turmoil, he achieved something remarkable.
What's that?
During his time at Wartburg Castle, Luther translated the New Testament into German.
Wow.
It was a monumental task that would have a profound impact on German language and culture.
I'm curious, why was this translation so significant? Weren't there already German versions of the Bible?
There were, but they were often based on the Latin Vulgate, which itself was a translation.
Okay.
Luther worked directly from the original Greek texts, making his translation more accurate and accessible to ordinary people.
Oh, okay.
He also used really vivid language, short sentences, and even incorporated earthy expressions to make it more engaging.
So he wasn't just translating the words, he was capturing the spirit of the text and making it relevant to the common folk.
Exactly. Luther believed that everyone should be able to read and interpret the scriptures for themselves without relying on the church's interpretation. It was central to his challenge to the church's authority.
It's amazing to think that while Luther was secluded in a castle, his ideas were spreading far and wide, fueled by his German translation.
But it wasn't just the written word that carried his message. Luther's friend, Lucas Cranach, a talented artist, created visual propaganda that played a vital role in shaping Luther's image and spreading the Reformation's message.
The power of images. Even today, a striking image can be more impactful than 1,000 words. Imagine the influence they held in a time when many people couldn't even read.
Precisely. Cranach produced iconic portraits of Luther, designed pamphlets with eye-catching visuals, and even created satirical cartoons mocking the Pope and the church hierarchy. This was, pre-internet, yet they grasped what we're only now rediscovering. Controlling the narrative is key. Could Luther have succeeded without this media savvy? It makes you wonder.
But while all this was happening, back in Wittenberg, things were taking a dramatic turn. Our sources mention Luther's followers smashing statues and causing quite a ruckus.
Really?
What was going on there?
That's right. With Luther gone, a more radical faction led by Andreas Karlstadt gained influence. They abolished Mass, destroyed religious images, and even allowed clergy to marry.
No way. Wittenberg was transformed into a hotbed of radical reform. It sounds like the Reformation was starting to spin out of control, even without Luther at the helm.
That's a crucial point. The Reformation wasn't a unified, monolithic movement. It had different strands, some more radical than others. And even though Luther had ignited the fire, he was increasingly losing control over the flames.
So what was Frederick's reaction to all this? He was the one who orchestrated Luther's disappearance. But now Wittenberg was in turmoil.
He couldn't ignore the chaos. Frederick was concerned by the growing unrest and feared losing political support. He urged Luther to return and restore order.
I can only imagine Luther's reaction.
I know, right?
He must have been furious when he heard about what was happening in Wittenberg.
Oh, he was livid. He saw Karlstadt's actions as a betrayal
of
the true Reformation. He believed that destroying images and abolishing traditional practices went too far.
So what did he do? Did he sneak back into Wittenberg under cover of darkness and stage a dramatic confrontation with Karlstadt?
He did return, but not as a clandestine operative. Remember, he was still an outlaw, so he had to tread carefully. But once, back in Wittenberg, he launched a series of fiery sermons condemning Karlstadt and his followers.
Wow.
And reasserting his vision of the Reformation.
That's quite a comeback.
Yeah.
But didn't Luther himself challenge the church's authority? Isn't there a bit of a contradiction in condemning Karlstadt for taking things too far?
That's a valid point. Luther's reaction to Karlstadt's radicalism reveals a fascinating tension within him.
Yeah.
He was a revolutionary who challenged authority,
Right.
but he was also deeply conservative in his theology
Right.
and wary of anarchy.
He unleashed a force that he couldn't fully control.
Exactly.
It's a cautionary tale about the unpredictable nature of revolutions.
And as we'll see in the final part of our deep dive, this tension between radicalism and reaction would have even more dramatic consequences as the Reformation spread.
Wow.
And new leaders emerged, each with their own interpretation of Luther's ideas.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Martin Luther and the tumultuous world of the Reformation. When we left off, Luther had returned to Wittenberg, reasserted his authority, and kind of pushed back against the more radical reforms of Andreas Karlstadt. But, as we've seen, the Reformation was like this fire that had spread far beyond Luther's control.
Exactly. And as the flames spread, new interpretations of Luther's ideas emerged, leading to even greater upheaval and, sadly, violence. One event that really stands out is the German Peasants' War.
Right.
A massive uprising that really shook the foundations of the Holy Roman Empire.
Our outline mentions this war, and it seems inextricably linked to the Reformation. Did the peasants see Luther's challenge to authority as a call to action?
There's no doubt that Luther's message of individual conscience and his critique of the church's power resonated deeply with the peasantry. I mean, they were suffering under these oppressive feudal lords and facing economic hardship.
Right.
Many saw Luther as a champion for their cause.
So they believed Luther would support their demands for social and economic justice.
That's where things get complicated. While Luther believed in spiritual equality, he was deeply conservative when it came to social order. He didn't advocate for overthrowing the existing power structures. In fact, he vehemently opposed the peasants' use of violence to achieve their goals.
That's a fascinating contradiction. He challenges the authority of the church, yet he upholds the authority of the state, even when that state is oppressive.
It highlights the complexity of Luther's thinking,
Yeah.
the challenges of disentangling religious reform from social and political change. And it underscores the point you made earlier that the Reformation wasn't a monolithic movement.
Our outline refers to this as the emergence of multiple reformations, each with its own interpretation of Luther's ideas. It's almost as if Luther planted a seed that grew into a forest of different trees,
Right.
some bearing fruit that he never intended.
That's a powerful analogy. And among these trees that grew from Luther's seed, one figure stands out as both charismatic and controversial: Thomas Müntzer. He's described as Luther's most fascinating opponent.
Who was Müntzer, and what made him such a formidable challenger to Luther's vision of the Reformation?
Müntzer was a radical reformer who took Luther's ideas about individual conscience and spiritual authority to their logical extreme. He believed that God spoke directly to the people, not just through scripture, but also through visions and inspiration.
That sounds like a radical departure from the church's teachings.
Yeah.
How did Luther react to Münzer's claims?
He saw them as dangerous and heretical.
Really?
Remember, Luther still believed in the authority of scripture.
Right.
Müntzer, on the other hand, was essentially saying that anyone could claim to be receiving divine revelations.
Wow.
And that could lead to chaos, with everyone claiming to have their own divine mandate.
Did Münzer's ideas play a role in the Peasants' War?
Absolutely. Münzer's fiery sermons and his promises of divine intervention inspired the peasants to take up arms against their oppressors. He believed that God was on their side and that they were fighting a holy war.
So Luther found himself caught in the middle of this explosive situation. He sympathized with the peasants' grievances, but he condemned their use of violence.
It was a truly tragic situation.
Yeah.
The peasants, inspired by Münzer's rhetoric, were brutally crushed by the armies of the princes.
Oh, wow.
Münzer himself was captured, tortured, and executed.
It's a sobering reminder that revolutions, even those rooted in religious ideals, can quickly turn violent and have devastating consequences.
A key takeaway from Luther's story and the events of the Reformation is that ideas, once unleashed, can take on a life of their own. They can inspire both great acts of courage and terrible acts of violence.
It raises the question of responsibility.
Yeah.
If you spark a revolution, do you bear any responsibility for the unintended consequences?
That's a question worth pondering. How do we balance the need for change with the need for order? How do we prevent noble ideals from being twisted into justifications for violence and oppression?
These are questions that resonate even today, centuries after Luther's dramatic stand at Worms.
Indeed. Luther's story is a powerful reminder that history is not simply a collection of dates and events.
Right.
It's a tapestry woven with complex ideas, human passions, and unintended consequences.
And it's a reminder that those who seek to change the world must grapple with the ethical implications of their actions.
Well said. And that brings our deep dive into the world of Martin Luther to a close.
Wow.
It's been a fascinating journey through a pivotal moment in history. We encourage you to explore further, to delve deeper into the sources we've discussed, and to continue wrestling with the questions raised by this remarkable period.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into history. If you've enjoyed exploring the past with us, be sure to subscribe and join us for our next adventure into the annals of time.